So you're very musically inclined. You like other genres of music. You play instruments, right? Why did you choose specifically to become a rapper? Like, why not be in a rock band or another genre? What was it about hip hop that just was it?
You know, what do I like? I've always had a wide palette of tastes. Like, I've always listened to all types of different music, rock, jazz, you know, and eventually that did become hip hop as, you know, as we talked about earlier when I got into Public Enemy and Wu-Tang as a teenager. But, you know what it was? Like the music from a musical side, what drew me to hip hop was the absolute, complete, and total freedom musically. And what I mean by that is this: like when I was a kid and a teenager, you know, I played in a few different bands, you know, with schoolmates and stuff like that. But you were always very limited to what you did. Like, we're a punk band or we're this kind of rock band. And like, I may feel that way on Tuesday, but I may not feel that way on Thursday. Whereas with hip hop, as long as the drums are hitting, you can rap over rock, you can rap over funk, you can rap over soul, you can rap over jazz, you can rap over Zydeco, you could rap over klezmer music, you could rap over accordions. Like, you know, there is no limit to what could be done musically as long as the beat is knocking. So from a music side, that's definitely what drew me to it, to where I could just literally make whatever I wanted to make that day. From the rhyming side, like, I just had too much. My brain goes too fast and has too many thoughts and too many strong opinions on different things. It was just inevitable.
So November 17th, 2008, you end up finding out your day job is closing down, right? What kind of job were you working at the time?
So at the time, you know, I moved to Brooklyn. I got a job. I was working at it was a website, www.digicombos.com, and they sold high-end digital camera packages. I was a bookkeeper for the website. Like, the, you know, orders would come in from the internet, and I would input them into QuickBooks and, you know, track all the income and expenses. The skills that helped me later, like running an independent label and, you know, having to do my own paperwork and taxes and stuff like that. So it was interesting because the office was entirely like Orthodox Hasidic Jewish folks. And they were mostly older folks. And then you've got me, the hillbilly in Rockaware, you know, just plot in the middle of it. And so, you know, it was a dope job. Like, it was actually the only day job that I've ever had that I didn't hate, because I was allowed to like work independently. I could talk to girls on Gmail chat while I was on the clock. You know, we got off at noon on Friday. Like, it was an ill job. But so what basically happened was, after I moved to New York, I got an internship at a recording studio, because this is kind of the glue that holds the rest of my career together from November 2008 to the present, is that I become an engineer. Now, it had dawned on me shortly after I moved to New York that I needed to learn. You know, I'd already been recording in my bedroom, and I'd put out, you know, I'd pressed up 4 albums and released them on Space Lab by that point. And so I kind of realized that if I was going to be competitive making music, my music had to sound sonically pleasing. Like, it had to sound good if it was going to compete with what was out there. So somewhere along the way, the idea popped into my head that, you know, if I become an engineer, not only will my own music sound better, but that's a way that I could maybe make a living and keep myself plugged into the music industry as I'm trying to get Jake Palumbo off the ground. Like, at this point, you know, I had still, from the time I was in Tennessee till I moved to New York, I was doing DIY touring. By this point, we did have social media and MySpace and Facebook, and things are starting to come around, and I'm working the internet and booking tours off MySpace and things like that. But I've got this pretty good little groove going where I've got a day job that I don't hate. And at nights and weekends, I'm an intern at Progressive Music Studios in Manhattan. And I just tried to be the best unpaid, assistant that I could possibly be. I tried to be as useful as humanly possible so that they would want to keep me around and teach me things. Because at this point, like I knew what I was doing. I just needed to, learn, the rest of the story, from people who were actually experienced doing it. So I interned at that studio for about a year and a half. And in the same week, all this happened. So I had just returned. I going back to, I would hustle shows off MySpace and whatnot. I had gotten a show at Westchester University in Westchester, PA. I was on my way back from that show in Westchester University when I got the news that my day job was closing because of the 2008 recession. I don't know if it's depending on your age, you may remember that time clearly. If you're younger, you might not. But like the entire U.S. banking system almost collapsed at that point. And a lot of companies were starting to go under. And my company was one of them. So I got the notice that my job was closing at the end of the week. The following 48 hours, two different things happened. I got my first paid studio session. One of the engineers at the studio had quit, and they needed somebody to record a rapper named Wise, who I never saw again. And I got $40 to record Wise. The day after, I want to say, I sold 3 beats off Craigslist, actually. I was hustling beats off Craigslist at the time. And a rapper named Wally Dutch, who I also never saw again, bought... I think he bought 3 beats for like $400 or $500, something like that. So in the same 72 hours, I've just lost my job, and I just made my first dollars in the music industry, basically. And so what kind of happened was I ended up in a situation where I not just had an opportunity to make this a full-time thing, but I kind of had no other choice, because when I lost my job, I started looking for another one and I couldn't find one. And because I was getting out and networking in New York and going to shows and performing and, trying to get my name out there, it became easier to find rappers and people who rap and bring them to the studio and make money that way than it was to actually find another 9-to-5. And so from 2008 till today, I've completely survived off the sum of the parts. Like, the money, the work that I do as an engineer, selling beats as a producer, rapping, doing features, doing shows. I sometimes, teach workshops and, do guest speaking stuff, helping teach, people about the music biz. Like the sum of all those parts, I've out of necessity is the mother of invention. So I was in a position where I just kind of had to tread water and make it work until the next thing came along. But the next thing never came along. What came along was 16 years of building up what we have today. So I got hired on at that studio finally, but not so fast, because that was the last week of November. In December, the building that studio was in opted to not renew their lease. So I was out of that job too. I wandered into a place called Play Studios that was a 13-room facility in Manhattan. It's one of the many studios that's not there anymore now, but I was the manager. I managed to get a gig as the manager at Play Studios. I did that for about 2 years. When I write my book, I'll have a lot to say about that era. There was some wild stories and I saw some wild things. But basically, over that period of time, mind you, I'm still learning engineering too. Like I'm figuring all this out on the job. And people often ask me like, well, how did you get so nice with Pro Tools and how did you do this and how did you do this? That was the difference in whether I ate food or not. Like, very literally, like if this artist did not walk out of the studio feeling satisfied with, what they just worked on, then, they're not going to want to pay. And then, I'm walking out of here with nothing. So, it was a lot of baptism by fire, like learning the trade on the job, but also, but networking through that. So what ended up happening was I worked at Play Studios for about 2 years and there was all kinds of problems. The former owner had a bad habit of spending my paycheck on cocaine.
Wow.
And there was a lot of times, like I'm in the studio working with big artists and, I'm running the risk of getting my lights cut off because of things like that. So it was one of those things that like I just kept toughing it out because I knew that something was going to come around. So as fate would have it, in what was that, 2012, I ended up getting my own studio space in the building next door. I was in that studio for about 7 years until they sold the building, and my studio's been in Brooklyn now since 2017. But point being is that from 2012 to the present, I've just had my own studio space because it became a situation of I would rather just shoulder the responsibility of paying the rent and the bills and going through all the headaches so that I can run things the way that I want to run them. Because it seems like, I never get into arguments with myself, really, about how we should do things. So as I start doing that, where this ties back into the rapping and producing is that, if you go through the list of like all the notable artists that I've collaborated with, like either on songs together, rhyming, or, artists I've produced for and done beats for, in 85% of those cases, like I started out as their engineer, and what I always did was I really tried to apply patience to the situation. And what I mean is that I would never bum rush people with my music. Like I would do the exact opposite. Like I would just, as time goes on, word of mouth, artists know other artists. People start recommending me. Yo, you should go work with Jake. He's nice. He's fast. He's efficient. And I end up in the studio with a lot of people, with Sadat X, with the Beat Nuts, with, all types of people. And I just at first would focus on just doing my job and doing it well and doing it properly and doing it thorough, making sure their music sounded as good as I could possibly make it and that everything ran smoothly and they'd want to come back and work with me and just establish myself as like a dependable, cool dude. And then what I would find is that by the time you've established a rapport that does not come with an agenda and your hand out looking for something, it's such an easier sell. It's an easier conversation to be like, hey, could I play you some beats? Or, hey, I'm working on an album. Would you want to jump on one of these songs? Like those conversations happen. One example I use, because he's a friend, I was Tony Touch's engineer I started working with Tony on the Peacemaker 3 album. Now I work with Tony to this day. He was at the studio last week. But, I worked with Tony for probably a year before I even told him that I did music and rhymed and things like that. And, by that point, we'd already established a rapport. And, a week or two later, my song was on Toka Tuesdays on Shade 45. And I didn't have to ask him to do that. You know what I mean? And so that's what I mean. And that's, kind of advice to any artist that's on the come up is that if you approach a situation with how can I add value instead of what I can take for it? And it's stuff like that is how I feel like one of the ways I've been able to avoid the culture vulture conversation is because I approach my approach to hip hop with what can I contribute to the pot instead of what I can take from the pot. But point being, that's what I meant to say earlier. I couldn't find the words at the time. But point being is that, you know, I spent those next few years like with my head down, just building my skills up, building my clientele up, and building up the network of artists that, you know, wanted to work with me. And as time went on, that did become a much easier conversation, making records with these folks. You know, I released a few albums in that process. I put out District Selectman in 2007. I put out Jobber to the Stars in 2011, Curtain Jerker in 2014. Jake It Till You Make It was kind of the turning point album for me where people finally started actually hearing, you know, actually had some semblance of who I was. And I start getting radio play and, you know, a little bit better looks on the internet and things like that. And so if you look at that, the guest list on that album, you've got Sean Price, rest in peace. You've got Rock Marciano, you know, Smith & Wesson, Rusty Jukes, Shabam Sadiq, Elda Sensei. You know, these are all people that like I was mixing their albums or recording them or doing something. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I spent that period, you know, basically just trying to you know, add value to the pot so that people were more receptive to, you know, actually wanting to hear what I do musically.
Right.